Tonight, we reveal how General Mark Milley discovered a secret Pentagon conspiracy designed to destroy the U.S.-Turkey alliance. What he found will shock you. Fabricated intelligence, millions in diverted funds, and a plot reaching the highest levels of American military leadership. This is the story of Operation Crossroads, and how one general's courage saved a crucial NATO partnership. The secure briefing room in the Pentagon was unusually quiet that Tuesday evening. General Mark Milley sat alone at the polished conference table, surrounded by classified documents that would soon change everything. For months, he had noticed troubling patterns in America's relationship with Turkey, but what lay before him now was evidence of something far more sinister than bureaucratic incompetence. The documents had arrived through unofficial channels, a trusted contact within intelligence circles who had grown increasingly concerned about what they were witnessing. As Milley began reading, his expression grew darker with each page. What he was discovering wasn't just policy disagreement. It was organized sabotage from within the highest levels of the Pentagon itself. 3 days earlier, Milley had requested a routine briefing on Turkish military cooperation. What he received instead raised immediate red flags. Intelligence assessments that contradicted his personal knowledge of Turkish operations, funding delays that seemed designed to create diplomatic tensions, most troubling of all, communication intercepts that felt manufactured rather than authentic. His suspicions led him to conduct his own investigation through channels he had developed over decades of military service. What his trusted contacts uncovered was a conspiracy so sophisticated and far-reaching that it challenged everything he thought he knew about Pentagon operations. The conspiracy had a name: Operation Crossroads. It had structure, funding, and clear objectives. Most shocking of all, it had been operating successfully for nearly 2 years, systematically undermining one of America's most important strategic partnerships. Operation Crossroads wasn't the work of rogue agents or disgruntled mid-level officials. The documents spread across Milley's desk revealed a carefully orchestrated campaign involving senior Pentagon leadership, contracted intelligence analysts, and an extensive network of media contacts and academic institutions. The conspiracy's goal was elegantly simple: create enough artificial crises in U.S.-Turkish relations to justify a fundamental realignment of American Middle Eastern policy. By manufacturing evidence of Turkish unreliability and strategic divergence, the conspirators aimed to push Turkey out of NATO's inner circle and redirect American support toward other regional partners. Their methods were sophisticated and multi-layered. Phase 1 involved creating operational difficulties, delayed weapons shipments, bureaucratic obstacles in joint military exercises, and mysterious communication failures that would strain day-to-day cooperation. These weren't accidents or inefficiencies. They were carefully calculated acts of sabotage designed to create frustration and mistrust on both sides. Phase 2 escalated to information warfare. The conspirators had developed relationships with journalists, think tank analysts, and academic researchers who could be fed selective information to create negative narratives about Turkish reliability and democratic governance. What appeared to be independent reporting and analysis was actually coordinated messaging designed to shift American and European public opinion against Turkey. As Milley dug deeper into the documents, the financial scope of Operation Crossroads became clear. Over 2 years, more than $15 million had been diverted from legitimate Pentagon programs to fund the conspiracy's activities. The money flowed through a complex network of contracts and subcontracts that made it nearly impossible to trace. Some funds went to legitimate-seeming research contracts with think tanks that would produce studies critical of Turkish policies. Other money paid for conferences and symposiums, where hand-picked experts would present conclusions that supported the conspiracy's narrative. The most disturbing payments went directly to journalists and media personalities, who would plant stories or ask pointed questions designed to damage Turkish-American relations. The conspirators had even established what they called crisis response funds, money set aside to amplify negative stories about Turkey, or to quickly commission studies that would support their position whenever genuine diplomatic disagreements arose. They were prepared to exploit any real tension to advance their artificial narrative. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of Operation Crossroads was how it corrupted the intelligence assessment process. The conspirators had learned to inject false or misleading information into intelligence channels at multiple points, making it extremely difficult to identify the source of contamination. They would take genuine intelligence about Turkish military operations and subtly alter key details to make those operations appear threatening or destabilizing. They fabricated communications between Turkish officials and regional actors, creating the impression of secret deals or unauthorized activities. Most sophisticated of all, they learned to time their disinformation to coincide with real events, making their fabrications seem credible and urgent. Milley discovered that several recent intelligence briefings he had received contained information that had been deliberately distorted by Operation Crossroads personnel. Assessments of Turkish military capabilities had been systematically understated to make Turkey appear less valuable as an ally. Reports of Turkish cooperation with Kurdish forces had been suppressed while evidence of tensions was amplified. The result was a completely distorted picture of Turkish behavior and intentions. As he continued reading, Milley realized that Operation Crossroads had developed international connections that made it even more dangerous. The conspirators had been coordinating with like-minded officials in other NATO countries who shared their skepticism about Turkish independence and regional policies. The first month is practice when you invised an additional pieces into the mostly graphic in the company, and European contacts provided additional channels for spreading negative narratives about Turkey while creating the impression of broad allied concern about Turkish behavior. These foreign partners also helped legitimize the conspiracy's activities by providing ostensibly independent confirmation of American concerns about Turkish reliability. Most troubling of all, Milley discovered evidence that Operation Crossroads had established contact with Kurdish separatist groups and other regional actors who could be manipulated to create incidents that would support the conspiracy's narrative about Turkish overreach and destabilizing behavior. What the conspirators hadn't counted on was the sophistication of Turkish intelligence services. As Milley would later learn, Turkish operatives had been aware of Operation Crossroads almost from its inception and had been carefully documenting its activities while preparing their own response. Turkish intelligence had identified the key American participants, tracked their communications, and even penetrated some of their meetings. They had recordings of conversations where conspirators discussed their goals and methods with shocking openness. They had financial records showing the flow of money from Pentagon accounts to media contacts and think tanks. Most importantly, Turkish intelligence had been feeding the conspirators false information designed to expose their methods and intentions. They would plant stories they knew would be stolen and distorted, then track how the information was manipulated and disseminated. It was a counterintelligence operation of remarkable sophistication. But Turkish officials faced a dilemma. If they exposed Operation Crossroads themselves, it would be dismissed as foreign propaganda, designed to deflect legitimate criticism. They needed the exposure to come from within the American system, from someone whose credibility couldn't be questioned. That someone turned out to be General Mark Milley himself. Armed with Turkish intelligence and his own investigation, Milley made the decision to confront the conspirators directly. He arranged a meeting under the pretext of discussing routine intelligence matters, then presented them with evidence of their entire operation. The meeting took place in a secure Pentagon conference room on a Thursday afternoon. As the conspirators filed in, expecting a routine briefing, they found themselves facing documents, recordings, and financial records that laid bare 2 years of covert operations. Milley methodically presented the evidence. Fabricated intelligence reports with their real sources identified. Financial transfers to media contacts with dates and amounts. Recorded conversations where they discussed their goals and methods. One by one, he named names and revealed the full scope of their activities. The reaction was swift and revealing. Initial denials quickly gave way to attempts at justification. The conspirators claimed they were protecting American interests from Turkish duplicity. They argued that their intelligence manipulation was necessary because official channels were compromised by Turkish influence. They insisted that their media operations were essential to educate the American public about Turkish unreliability. When justification failed, threats emerged. Veiled but unmistakable warnings about the consequences of exposing classified operations. suggestions that Milley himself might be compromised by Turkish intelligence, implications that his career and reputation would be destroyed if he pursued the matter further. But Milley had already made his decision. The evidence was too overwhelming, the threat to American interests too severe, and the violation of democratic principles too fundamental to ignore. Within hours of the confrontation, he was briefing senior officials at the highest levels of government about Operation Crossroads. The response was swift and comprehensive. The conspiracy was immediately shut down, with key personnel reassigned or placed on administrative leave. Ongoing operations were halted, and damage assessment teams were formed to evaluate how much harm had been done to Turkish-American relations. But the cleanup extended far beyond just stopping the conspiracy. Intelligence assessments had to be reviewed and corrected. Media narratives based on fabricated information had to be identified and countered. Most importantly, the trust between American and Turkish officials that had been damaged by 2 years of artificial crises had to be rebuilt. For General Milley, the decision to expose Operation Crossroads came at significant personal cost. He knew that revealing classified information and challenging senior officials would end his career and potentially expose him to legal consequences. He understood that he would be attacked as a traitor, a foreign agent, or a glory-seeking whistleblower. But he also knew that remaining silent would make him complicit in the destruction of a vital alliance based on lies and fabrication. His oath to defend the Constitution meant protecting democratic institutions from domestic enemies, even when those enemies wore American uniforms and held high positions in government. The weight of that decision was evident as he prepared to make his extraordinary revelation public. In a secure location, surrounded by the evidence that had cost him everything, Milley prepared to tell the American people and the world about the conspiracy that had nearly succeeded in reshaping Middle Eastern geopolitics. The broadcast began at exactly 11:47 p.m., with no music, no fanfare, just the stark reality of an emergency transmission. Milley appeared on screen from what looked like a secure, undisclosed location. His uniform was crisp, his posture rigid, but his eyes carried the weight of a man about to shatter international relations forever. "Good evening," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "What I'm about to reveal tonight will forever change the relationship between the United States and Turkey. Exactly 72 hours ago, I received classified documents that expose a conspiracy within the Pentagon designed to destabilize one of NATO's most strategic allies." Behind him, monitors displayed fragments of documents marked "Top Secret" in bold red letters. The very presence of these documents on screen was itself a violation so severe that careers would end before dawn. "For the past 18 months," Milley continued, "I suspected something was fundamentally wrong with our policy implementation toward Turkey. Military aid packages worth hundreds of millions of dollars were being mysteriously delayed. Intelligence sharing protocols were being altered without proper authorization. Most disturbing of all, back-channel communications with Ankara were being systematically sabotaged." He held up a thick folder bearing multiple classification stamps. "What I discovered 72 hours ago confirmed my worst fears. A group of senior Pentagon officials, operating under the codename Operation Crossroads, had been working systematically to fracture the U.S.-Turkey alliance from within our own government." Milley opened the folder, revealing documents that would normally never see daylight. These weren't policy disagreements or bureaucratic inefficiencies. This was organized, premeditated sabotage of American foreign policy by American officials who believed they knew better than elected leadership.
American foreign policy.
His voice grew colder as he detailed the conspiracy. The conspirators weren't simply questioning policy, they were actively undermining it, falsifying intelligence reports about Turkish military capabilities, spreading disinformation about President Erdogan's intentions through orchestrated media leaks, creating phantom security threats to justify cutting off crucial cooperation. Moving closer to the camera, Milley's military bearing was evident in every gesture. The documents I'm showing you contain actual transcripts from classified meetings where these officials discussed how to engineer a strategic realignment in the Eastern Mediterranean. In plain English, they were planning to isolate Turkey and push them toward Russia and China. He displayed the first document, its classification markings clearly visible. This memorandum, dated 6 weeks ago, outlines their three-phase strategic recalibration. Phase 1. Create artificial crises in military cooperation through unnecessary delays and bureaucratic obstacles in weapons deliveries. Phase 2. Conduct selective intelligence leaks to media contacts to damage Turkish reputation in Washington and European capitals. Phase 3. Present these manufactured problems to Congress as evidence that Turkey could no longer be trusted. The general revealed that Turkish intelligence had been building a comprehensive file for months. They knew exactly who was involved, when meetings took place, what was being planned, and who was funding these operations. They were waiting for the right moment to expose everything. That moment came when the conspirators attempted their final phase, a completely fabricated intelligence report claiming Turkish military bases were supporting unauthorized operations against Kurdish forces. This report was designed to trigger a congressional investigation that would effectively end the alliance. Milley's expression darkened. I had seen preliminary versions of this report during routine briefings. Something felt wrong. Sources were vague, evidence circumstantial, conclusions didn't match what I knew from Turkish military contacts. So I began asking questions. The more questions I asked, the more evasive answers became. Access to source materials was restricted. Key analysts were reassigned. When I demanded to review raw intelligence, I was told it was compartmentalized beyond my clearance level, which should have been impossible given my position. The general described how his suspicions led to his own investigation through trusted contacts. What they found was damning. The intelligence didn't exist. Sources cited in the report were fabricated. Evidence had been manufactured by the conspirators themselves. But the fabrication was sophisticated, Milley acknowledged. They created false communication intercepts, doctored satellite imagery, and recruited Kurdish assets willing to provide false testimony for compensation. This was a professional disinformation operation conducted by our own people against our allies. He displayed financial documents showing the scope of their operation. Over 2 years, more than $15 million in discretionary Pentagon funds were diverted to support Operation Crossroads. Money that should have gone to legitimate defense priorities was used to undermine American foreign policy. They had established a network within think tanks, academic institutions, and media organizations. They were paying for studies supporting their narrative. They funded conferences where hand-picked experts presented predetermined conclusions. The general revealed how close the conspiracy came to succeeding.
Congressional hearings were scheduled based on fabricated intelligence. Key committees had been briefed with doctored assessments. Allied governments were receiving information designed to damage Turkish credibility. The machinery of alliance destruction was approaching its target.
But I couldn't let that happen, Milley stated firmly. Not when I knew it was based on lies. Not when I understood the strategic implications. So I did something against every instinct of my training. I confronted them directly. He described a tense meeting in a secure Pentagon conference room.
I requested a meeting under the pretext of discussing routine intelligence matters. When they arrived, I presented evidence of their entire operation. One by one, I named names, revealed dates, exposed communication channels, documented financial transactions.
The reaction was immediate. First, shock silence, then denial. When confronted with irrefutable evidence, came attempts to justify their actions as necessary for security. Finally, when justification failed, came veiled threats about consequences of exposing classified operations. Their defense was that I was being manipulated by Turkish intelligence, that I'd lost perspective, Milley continued. But they couldn't explain the paper trail, recorded conversations, money transfers to media contacts, or fabricated intelligence about to be presented to Congress. The conspiracy reached higher than initially suspected. We're not talking about rogue middle management. This operation had backing from Deputy Assistant Secretary level and above, people who could authorize budget transfers, influence intelligence assessments, control access to senior policymakers. Milley described Turkish intelligence's counter-operation. They didn't just passively collect evidence. They actively fed conspirators information designed to expose their methods. They created false intelligence they knew would be stolen and manipulated, then tracked how it was altered and disseminated. Turkish operatives had penetrated the conspiracy's communication networks. They had real-time access to planning meetings, financial transactions, coordination with media contacts. They were watching the entire operation while building an unassailable case. The timing of my confrontation wasn't coincidental, Milley admitted. Turkish intelligence provided enough evidence to act, but they wanted exposure to come from an unimpeachably credible American source, rather than foreign intelligence that might be dismissed as biased. He described the immediate aftermath. Within hours, emergency sessions were held at the highest Pentagon and National Security Council levels. Operation Crossroads was shut down. Key personnel were reassigned or placed on leave. Ongoing sabotage operations were halted. But damage control extended beyond stopping the conspiracy. We had to rebuild trust with Turkish officials who now knew American government elements had worked to undermine their country. We had to review and correct intelligence contaminated by fabricated information. As Milley neared his conclusion, his tone became reflective. Some will question my decision to speak publicly about classified operations. They'll argue that exposing intelligence failures damages American credibility and provides ammunition to adversaries. But I argue the opposite, he continued firmly. Covering up this conspiracy would have been real damage to credibility. Allowing the alliance to be destroyed based on lies would have been the true gift to adversaries. When I swore an oath to defend the Constitution, I didn't just promise to protect America from foreign enemies. I promised to protect it from domestic ones, too. The conspirators of Operation Crossroads were domestic enemies of constitutional governance, and exposing them was my constitutional duty. The relationship between the United States and Turkey is too important to be sacrificed for the narrow ambitions of a few Pentagon conspirators. Both nations deserve better than having their alliance undermined by officials who believe they know better than elected leadership. The conspiracy is now exposed. The conspirators have been identified and removed. The fabricated intelligence has been corrected. The alliance has been saved from those who would have destroyed it from within. As Milley prepared to end his historic broadcast, he leaned forward, his tone becoming more personal. Before I conclude, I want to speak directly to you, the citizens who have witnessed this story unfold. What you've heard tonight should be deeply troubling to anyone who believes in democratic governance. The existence of Operation Crossroads raises fundamental questions about how our government operates and who really makes our foreign policy. When unelected officials can manipulate intelligence and influence major decisions through deception, we must ask, are we truly living in a democracy? This conspiracy succeeded for as long as it did because good people assumed our systems would prevent such manipulation. The conspirators exploited that trust and nearly succeeded in destroying a vital alliance. The question now is what you will do with this knowledge. Will you demand accountability from your elected representatives? Will you insist on transparency in intelligence operations? Will you question official narratives that seem designed to manipulate rather than inform? Democracy requires active participation from informed citizens. It requires people willing to ask hard questions and demand honest answers. It requires vigilance against those who would manipulate democratic institutions for personal purposes. As the general prepared to conclude, he fixed his gaze directly on the camera. I leave you tonight with 3 critical questions that every citizen should be asking. First, if a conspiracy this sophisticated could operate undetected within the Pentagon for 2 years, what other operations might currently be manipulating your government's policies without your knowledge? Second, when unelected officials can successfully fabricate intelligence and manipulate policy for nearly 2 years, what does this say about the real balance of power in American democracy? Third, now that you know your government was systematically lying about a crucial alliance, what responsibility do you have as citizens to demand accountability and reform? These questions have no easy answers, but they demand serious consideration from every person who believes in democratic governance and honest international relations. Milley stepped back from the camera. The conspiracy is exposed. The alliance is saved. But the work of protecting democratic institutions from those who would manipulate them never ends. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring enough to seek the truth. And thank you for holding your government accountable to the principles it claims to serve. The screen began to fade, displaying text, "Follow for more revelations. Share if you believe in truth. Question everything." As the broadcast ended, viewers around the world were left to process not just Operation Crossroads, but the broader implications of what they had witnessed. The alliance between two NATO partners had been saved, but at the cost of comfortable illusions about how their government operated. The three questions posed by General Milley would resonate far beyond that night, challenging citizens to become more engaged, more skeptical of official narratives, and more demanding of accountability. Whether they would rise to that challenge would determine not just the future of American foreign policy, but the health of American democracy itself.